All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Hillary Holly. I'm the organizing director for Fair Fight Action. And this is now day 2 of the daily hearings that we will be holding as the Georgia legislature approaches many anti-voting bills, both in our Georgia House and Georgia Senate chambers. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge what today is for the state of Georgia and across the country. A year ago today, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered by 3 racist white men down in Brunswick County in Southeast Georgia. And when that murder happened, it took a lot of work from the local community organizers down in Brunswick in Southeast Georgia to ensure that his story was heard. And because of their work, and which led to investigators to look into the handling of this case, the world got to know Ahmaud Arbery's story. And so I specifically want to say thank you to Just Georgia, the Georgia NAACP, the Southern Center for Human Rights, and several other organizations who have just continued to fight not only for justice for Ahmaud, but to prevent Black murder in the future. And as you all know, after Ahmaud's murder, the Georgia legislature decided to pass a hate crimes bill, where if any future incident like Ahmaud's happened, not only would the racist white men be charged with crimes, but they would also be held for hate crimes. And that process was very interesting, and it actually is related now into what we saw happen just a few minutes ago in the state chamber. But we had a Georgia Senator, Caucus, who tried to sabotage that bill that would help Ahmaud Arbery situation and help bring justice. And this was despite having bipartisan support for a hate crimes bill. But Senator Caucus is so racist and is so disconnected from the Black community that he decided to try to sabotage the bill and insert a poison pill. And the way that is connected today is in the Georgia Senate chamber this morning, the senators were debating a horrible bill that will be discussed by our experts this morning that will now require anyone who wants to vote by mail to have a hard photo of their photo ID when they are requesting an absentee ballot. And this is only happening because we saw many new Georgia voters choose to vote by mail for the first time in 2020, specifically our older Black voters who were vastly more likely to die of COVID-19. And because this story, and it's all interconnected, we had the amazing Senator Lucas tell a very emotional story about Jim Crow and how this is just the extension of Jim Crow here in Georgia. And it led him to tears. And Fair Fight Action will be posting this video of Senator Lucas's speech soon. And I really ask you all to watch it to really comprehend the trauma that is behind these racist and voter suppression tactics here in Georgia. But Senator Caucus, the same man who tried to sabotage the hate crimes bill when we had bipartisan support in response to Ahmaud Arbery's death, then came after Senator Lucas, after he cried about Jim Crow in Georgia and said today that he was performing and he was performing, his tears were a performance. And so once again, Senator Caucus has made it very clear that he does not care about Black Georgians and their right to vote. He made it clear when he tried to sabotage the hate crimes bill. He made it clear again today when he reacted the way in which he did to Senator Lucas. And it is a shame that our Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan, continues to allow this kind of racism to happen on the Georgia Senate chamber floor. And so with that, I just wanted to set the tone to how egregious and what we're really up against here in Georgia. And not only these bills racist, but the theme of today is that these bills are also going to cost a lot of money on the local and county level. And so to explain more about how our counties could potentially have unfunded mandates passed down to them, we have an expert, Aklima, who is the state director for All Voting is Local, which is a campaign stemmed out of the leadership conference. Aklima is an extraordinary lawyer who has been working with election administration issues here in Georgia for many, many years now. And she will walk through exactly how many of these bills have a whole tax element that we think that the public, reporters, and voters deserve to know. And so with that, Aklima, I will pass it off to you.
Thank you so much for that, Hillary. And thank you to all of the supporters who are supporting Ahmaud Arbery's family, especially today, a very difficult day as we grapple with institutional and systemic racism across the country. So yes, my name is Aklima Kondokor. I am the Georgia State Director at All Voting is Local, where we focus on election administration issues. Now, election administration issues are about voters and their ability to vote, and counties and their ability to make voting accessible to voters. Over the 2021 and 2020 election cycles, we worked with counties, election officials, the state, and voting rights advocates to increase ballot access by advocating for drop boxes and expanded early voting. HB 531's fiscal impact on election administration imposes an undue burden on counties and voters that will cost Georgia taxpayers millions for what amounts to less ballot access. HB 531's fiscal impact could cost Georgians over $57 million total for reduced access to the ballot. That's a lot like trading in your brand new working car for a car with no engine, no doors, and tires that cost more to own and operate. HB 531 is a non-starter and will cost taxpayers and counties more money for less ballot access. On drop boxes alone, HB 531 would limit the hours that people can access them, require that they be kept inside of an existing early voting site, and that they be monitored by an election or security worker. This will cost the state, and by extension, taxpayers, over $1 million. That's a lot of money for less convenience. Consider showing up to a drive-through because it's fast, cheap, and convenient food option, only to be diverted inside to pay more money for less options. That provision of HB 531 will take that option away from voters and will cost taxpayers more money. As for early voting, HB 531 is an all-out financial assault. For one, if voters want to continue to enjoy convenient access to requesting their absentee ballot, they will be required to have a driver's license or state-issued ID or be forced to provide a photocopy. For many voters who vote using the other acceptable forms of ID or simply do not have a driver's license, they will have to get a free state identification card to enjoy the convenience of requesting their absentee ballot without having to provide a photocopy. That will cost the state over $940,000. Because drop boxes will be made less available to voters, many of the over 1 million voters that chose to vote absentee last year would be diverted to in-person voting. So if we only consider that a modest 10% or about 330,000 voters or so would be pushed to vote in person, the increased cost to accommodate those voters would be a whopping $846,418,000 billed to counties. The cost to inform the public about these changes, and that is only the responsible thing to do, right? To provide for robust voter education would cost the state over $3 million. What's worse is that HB 531 prohibits private funding. So that means that private funding would no longer be available for counties to ease the cost burden of running their elections. In the 2020 November elections and 2021 elections, at least 43 Georgia counties received grants and private funding from nonprofit organizations totaling roughly $32 million. So that is $32 million that counties would be losing, and that cost would be pushed onto taxpayers to provide. These costs are burdensome for the state, counties, and taxpayers. And some notes on some other bills that also will cost money, but not only cost money, but cost us access to the ballot. As State Bill 67 passed today and is headed to the House. What it will do, and SB 69 will be heard in the Senate Ethics Committee today at 4:45 p.m. I urge everybody who's listening to please tune in and pay attention to the provisions of these bills, because not only are they costly and they add to that $57 million number that I mentioned when I first started, these bills also reduce access to the ballot. These bills contain some of the same toxic voting provisions included in HB 531 and are frankly a slick way of getting these restrictions out and passed that will reduce access for all Georgia voters. State Bill 67 is an absentee ballot. I would require absentee ballot IDs for every single absentee ballot application. So that would require that voters provide either their driver's license or state ID number or their with their absentee ballot application, or include a photocopy of another form of identification just to receive their absentee ballot application. So practically speaking, what does this mean? This means that if you are a voter who has a driver's license or has a state ID number, you can just write that in on your application and receive your absentee ballot application. But for the many other voters who do not have that form of identification to vote, who use their passport or tribal ID or some other acceptable form of identification in Georgia, you are now burdened with figuring out how to send a photocopy of your identification to the state to only receive an application to vote absentee. So now you have additional steps that will make it more difficult for you to even request your absentee ballot application, never mind sending it back. That is a whole other burden that is not even considered in SB 67. When it comes to SB 69, that would end automatic voter registration. SB 69 would get rid of this, which currently allows voters to automatically register to vote whenever they are down at the Department of Driver Services. As a matter of fact, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has celebrated our automatic voter registration system, where last year over 5 million voters were registered through DDS. If this law were in effect last year, that means over 5 million of Georgia's 7 million or so voters would not have been registered through DDS. This is an unacceptable loss. We must work to make sure that these bills are not passed because they are harmful to Georgia voters and they are costly to taxpayers and to counties who will bear the burden of having to shoulder these costs for less ballot access. So I urge you all to please tune in and pay attention to these bills because they are especially harmful. Now, I just want to pause here and pass to Hillary as we continue this robust conversation.
Thank you so much, Aklima. So we're just gonna go straight into questions. We have some really good questions in the chat. So the first question is, what impact would contacting my legislatures have if they are Republicans? So Aklima, do you have any ideas of why Republicans might be interested in this particular subject?
I think that all of our legislators should be interested in what their constituents think. This is just responsible legislating, right? If someone is asking for your vote, if someone relies on your vote for them to represent your district, then they ought to be interested in what you think. What you think as a voter, what you think as a constituent inherently matters, regardless of what a Republican may or may not view about your opinion. So this is why it's important. The more of us that can come together to tell our leaders what we need to access the ballot, the more ballot access we're going to be able to have. If they don't know what it is that we need because they don't hear from us, then it is incumbent on us to tell them. So we need to come together to let them know what we need so we can get it right.
Thank you. And then one thing that's important. So in 2019, after Georgia's 2018 elections, we had a massive bill, which was HB 16, which also had extreme taxpayer concerns. And at that time, Aklima and myself, Fair and many other people were trying to tell folks that there are unfunded mandates onto the counties. Unfortunately, that was not occurred. But what we predicted on unfunded mandates actually ended up happening. So what we saw after the bill was passed in 2019, where counties were very strapped to try to create feasible budgets for their election offices. And so this time, one reason why we think that letting all of our legislators know, but specifically Republican legislators know, that this will have county impact is because it really had a negative impact on counties. And this was before COVID-19 happened. This was before counties had to try to find additional funds. To help staff public health departments in their county. And so, as we all know, the Republicans always like to say that they are interested in saving taxpayer funds. Well, if that is true, then they really need to reconsider these bills and look at the fiscal impact that these may have. And so there is another question. Will there be a resource where I can reference this information to help myself and others be more informed? Yes, absolutely. This great organization called the Voting Rights Lab actually released this whole fiscal report that Akima is referencing to. They released it yesterday. I can be more than happy to find it and drop it in the chat during this call. But it is a pretty lengthy document that links to the spreadsheets and goes through the math of how exactly they calculated this analysis. So we can be sure to find that. And so thank you for that question. Let's look for another one. So how and when did the counties get paid when it came to recounts statewide and special elections in 2020? So I'll answer that question, and Akima, feel free to jump in. But Akima referenced earlier, one of the reasons why Georgia was able to have democracy and elections in 2020 was through private funding from the Center for Tech and Civic Life. And so what this funding did is, according to public resources, over $31 million from private funding came to counties to support their election offices. And without that $31 million going to numerous counties, both heavy leaning Republican counties, heavy leaning Democratic counties, a lot of these counties would have been financially strapped to deal with the recounts and the audits during this time. And so as HB 531 goes to ban private funding, this is something that is that will be very consequential to county commissioners and county election offices. As we know, because Georgia will remain to be a battleground state for a while to come. And so, Akima, I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Yes, I definitely do, because drop boxes, that was a fundamental lifeline for so many voters, especially voters with disabilities, especially voters who reside in areas that have had polling place closures and consolidations, as a safe and effective way for them to deliver their ballots. Under HB 531 and similar bills, that means that counties would not have a way to pay for drop boxes, because we know that the state only provided a minimal amount of funding for drop boxes, if anything at all. And so a lot of the Dropbox funding that was received came from nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations that wanted to fund our elections, that wanted to help us to continue to make sure that more voters have ballot access. Under the provisions that were proposed under HB 531 and similar bills, counties now would not have access to that funding. And if counties don't have access to that funding, that means we probably will not be able to have drop boxes at all. But if we are able to have drop boxes, these harmful bills will limit how people can even use those drop boxes, which means that essentially, even though we have them, they're unusable to us, which means they are useless to the majority of voters. So it's very important that counties are supported by private funding, because it helps them continue to open ballots ballot access to everyone in the state, because the state cannot afford to do that. And if the state can't afford to do that, and they are mandating or requiring that counties uphold our elections in a way that allows for ballot access, that means that that funding, that burden now falls onto taxpayers to cover. And it makes no sense when what it actually will amount to is less ballot access for all.
Thank you, Aklima. And there's another really good question that says, I frequently contact my representatives, but is it worthwhile to contact legislative leadership if they are not my actual representative? And so the answer is yes. A lot of times after you have contacted your local state representative and senator, it is absolutely helpful to contact legislative leadership, as many times or all the time they are responsible for which bills are heard and taken on in the rules committee, which then allows a bill to make it to the chamber floor for a vote. And so please, 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 you can always contact Speaker David Ralston's office. He controls everything in Georgia State House. Another important legislative leader to contact is Representative Barry Fleming. He is the chairman of the Special Election Integrity Committee, where many of these bills, specifically HB 531, is being debated. So yes, always contacting legislative leadership is very helpful. Thank you for that question. And then let's see, I'm looking for other questions. So I have questions about can people sue? So what I want to say is there are many, many lawyers who are watching the debates on both in the Senate and the House on these numerous bills. There are many organizations who are interested in the photo ID requirement for requesting an absentee ballot. There are many legal organizations that are interested in banning Saturday and Sunday early vote. So yes, the answer is yes. But to bring it back to the theme of this call, when counties or the state are sued, that is also an additional budget increase. And so not only are we looking at unfunded mandates because of all the things that Aklima listed, we now have to also anticipate additional legal funds for potential litigation in the future. And let's see. Aklima, I will ask you this question. So every conservative I talk to is obsessed with voters presenting photo IDs to vote. If we don't require photo ID with absentee ballots, what can I tell them will be the fail-safe that a registered voter is voting? They understand the scare tactic for Republicans, but they're trying to figure out like what is their actual fear.
So I think that the actual fear for many political folks is that their party might lose if more or different people have access to the ballot. The fail-safe here in Georgia is that when processing absentee ballot applications, your identification is checked many, many times. That means once you provide that information about the identification that you're going to use, folks over at your local Board of Elections office and registrar's office are going to check your information to make sure that it is proper, that it is available. They're going to make sure that it syncs up with the information that you put on the form. And then when they do receive your absentee ballot, once you have received your application and sent it back, they're going to check it again. And I think importantly, the part that we really need to focus on is that we heard a lot of fuss and a lot of fear about this absentee ballot process and checking photo ID and things like that over 2020. But we know that the Secretary of State's office investigated those concerns. We heard about so-called double voting and about that being a concern, but we know that there was no evidence of widespread double voting or any of these sort of irregularities that could cause missing votes throughout the state. We know that that was not a cause for concern. So where we hear that there are some folks that are concerned that there might be voting irregularities that could lead to some sort of improprieties within our system already has several fail safes in place. Folks check your identification when they receive your application. They check your identifiable information when they receive your ballot to process it, and they do this over and over again. And so we also know that there were investigations that were conducted last year. We also know there were lawsuits also investigating these issues last year, and none of those investigations or lawsuits actually turned out to show that there was evidence of fraud or any improprieties related to identification concerns. So what I would say is, if you need to communicate this to someone who sits within a political party who maybe is upset about the results of our last elections, you can point them to the facts. You can tell them, please look at these investigations. Please look at the outcome of these lawsuits. Please look at the current systems in place to ensure that everybody's vote is counted and counted correctly.
Thank you so much. There's so many good questions in the chat. I'm so excited. Thank you all. So another question, what was the result of the House Special Committee on Election Integrity hearing yesterday in regards to HB 531? So the good news is that they did not hold a vote on this bill yesterday. That means that voting rights advocates have now forced 3 hearings in committee on HB 531. That means that we have been able to slow down this process, which is very critical considering that this bill is now 59 pages long. And then there's also a question that, is the Georgia NAACP engaged, since the motives seem obvious? So the answer is yes. I encourage all of you to go to the Georgia NAACP's Twitter, where you can actually see their state president, Reverend James Woodall, give a very good testimony in front of the committee yesterday, specifically calling out the ban on Sunday voting, the voter ID requirement, and other things. So yes, the Georgia NAACP is very well tuned and fighting very hard with everyone. And then people who are asking about how to receive or how to find out if their county received private funding. There are people who are planning on releasing a lot of this information, so I say stay tuned. But if you are interested, let's say if you want to know if your county received private funding, call your Board of Elections office and ask them. And if your county received funding, then I would then encourage you to relay that information to your state legislator and letting them know, like, hey, this is how much money we got, and how do you plan on helping make that up for that money if you vote yes on HB 531? So thank you so much for that question. And then so to go ahead and wrap this up, because there's so many questions I see people asking, I will make sure that my colleague Kia Sims sends a follow-up email to all the people on this call. And what she can include are the phone numbers and email addresses to all of the state legislators that we think that are very important for you to contact. We will also be sure to include the link to the Voting Rights Lab fiscal analysis that Aklima was referring to. And we can also send some helpful talking points for you all as you all go to call your state elected officials. And for those who are not in state but want to help, and I saw some questions about this as well, as we know, HR 1 is being heard in the House in DC this Thursday. So we encourage for you who are not in Georgia to make sure that our US representatives and our US senators are aware that what's happening in Georgia is also happening in many states across the country, such as Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Texas, Wisconsin, the name goes on. And so let them know that we need HR 1 to pass, because we clearly need federal oversight as we see these many states across the country try to roll back voting rights. So thank you so much for everyone that joined today. You all sparked an amazing conversation and amazing questions. This is exactly why we are holding these hearings, because we believe that it is essential for voters and just people of Georgia and across the country to know what is going on with democracy. And for those who had questions about the faith community, specifically with concerns to banning Saturday, one day of Saturday voting, and trying to ban Sunday voting just outright. Fair Fight Action will be hosting our next hearing tomorrow evening, where we will have many, many amazing faith leaders from the Jewish community, from the Black church community, and just different faith organizations across the state, where they can share with you their insight and concerns about the attacks on democracy when it comes to faith organizing. So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow evening. And thank you again, Aklima, for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate you and all the work that you always do.
Thank you so much for having me. And we appreciate you and the Fair Fight team. Y'all are amazing advocates. And to all the people that showed up today, thank you for showing up. Keep showing up. Don't let anything deter you and stop your voice. Thank you, everybody. Keep voting.
All right. Have a good day. Thanks, everybody.